Keeping up appearances sold us tea, manners, and harmless social chaos. Reality was crueler. Time brought illness, loss, and disappearances no rerun ever shows. And when you uncover how the cast really changed, nostalgia breaks. Patricia Routledge, as Hyacinth Bucket. Patricia Routledge was born on February 17, 1929, in Birkenhead, England. At 61 years old, she played Hyacinth Bucket, a socially ambitious, status-obsessed middle-class woman, in Keeping Up Appearances. The role became the emotional engine of the series, turning everyday social anxiety into sharp, unforgettable comedy. From that moment on, Hyacinth was no longer just a character, but the spine holding the entire show together. That control and precision did not come from nowhere. Routledge grew up during the Great Depression and the Second World War in a working-class household. Financial insecurity shaped her sense of responsibility early on, and stability was something she learned to build for herself. Those instincts later carried into her stage career, earning her major recognition in works like Candide and Darling of the Day, long before television fame arrived. As her professional life expanded, her personal life quietly narrowed. Routledge never married and had no children, a reality she later described as the natural outcome of total commitment to her craft, rather than a conscious rejection of family. She acknowledged brief relationships, including affairs, but none evolved into permanence. That emotional self-containment became part of her strength as a performer, allowing her to play exaggerated characters without losing control. With time, even that discipline met its limits. In her later years, Routledge gradually stepped away from acting, not because of any publicly disclosed illness, but because age demanded a slower rhythm. She lived quietly in Chichester, staying connected to her faith and community, far removed from the noise of fame. Her estimated net worth of around $2.5 million reflected steady artistic labor rather than spectacle. Sadly, Patricia Routledge died on October 3, 2025, at the age of 96, from natural causes related to old age. Her funeral was held at Chichester Cathedral, followed by cremation, closing a career that lasted more than 6 decades. What remained was not just Hyacinth Bucket, but a lasting example of how restraint, not excess, creates longevity. Josephine Tewson, as Elizabeth Warden. Josephine Tewson was born on February 26, 1931, in Hampstead, London, England. At 59 years old, she played Elizabeth Warden, the timid, anxious neighbor, in Keeping Up Appearances. Her character functioned as the emotional pressure point of the series, constantly absorbing Hyacinth's dominance and turning social discomfort into quiet comedy. Through Elizabeth, the show revealed how intimidation could be just as funny as arrogance. That vulnerability felt authentic because it had roots in her early life. Tewson's childhood was shaped by the Second World War, marked by air raids, food shortages, and the persistent fear triggered by sirens overhead. The psychological tension of those years never fully disappeared, instead sharpening her sensitivity as a performer. As she moved into acting, this emotional awareness surfaced in television roles across British comedy, including Shelley and Clarence, where understatement became her signature strength. As her career stabilized, her private life remained unsettled. Tewson married actor Leonard Rossiter in 1958, but the marriage ended in divorce just 3 years later due to irreconcilable differences. In 1972, she married Henry Newman, whose death in 1980 left her deeply shaken and emotionally isolated. She had no children, and from that point onward, companionship increasingly came through work rather than family. Loss was followed by endurance rather than retreat. Tewson continued working steadily, but in later years her energy declined, and she gradually stepped back from acting. The absence of spectacle in her later life mirrored the quiet restraint that had always defined her performances. Sadly, Josephine Tewson died on August 18, 2022, at the age of 91, at Denville Hall, a retirement home for actors. By the end of her life, her estimated net worth stood at around $800,000, earned through more than 6 decades of consistent work, leaving behind a legacy that proved gentleness can endure far longer than noise. Clive Swift as Richard Bucket. Clive Swift was born on February 9, 1936, in Liverpool, England. At 54 years old, he played Richard Bucket, the endlessly patient, long-suffering husband, in Keeping Up Appearances. His quiet restraint grounded the series, giving Hyacinth's excess something solid to push against. Without Richard, the comedy would have floated. With him, it stayed painfully real. That instinct for restraint was formed early. Swift's childhood unfolded during the Second World War, when evacuation and uncertainty were part of daily life. Living under the threat of bombing taught him observation before expression, a trait that later defined his performances. It followed him into a disciplined career with the Royal Shakespeare Company and into films like Excalibur and A Passage to India, even as widespread fame remained secondary. Behind the scenes, however, balance proved harder to maintain. Swift married novelist Margaret Drabble in 1960, and the marriage lasted 15 demanding years before ending in divorce in 1975. Both were deeply absorbed in their careers, and the strain slowly eroded their relationship. They shared 3 children, and the later death of their daughter Rebecca in 2017 became a loss from which Swift never fully recovered. After that point, decline came quietly. In his final years, Swift suffered from respiratory failure, a condition worsened by age and physical fragility. Following his last screen appearance in 2017, he retreated almost entirely from public life. His estimated net worth of around $1.5 million reflected a career built on integrity rather than visibility. Clive Swift died on February 1, 2019, at the age of 82, at his home, after a short period of severe illness related to respiratory failure. His passing drew tributes not for celebrity, but for craft. Like Richard Bucket himself, Swift left without noise, but with weight. Judy Cornwell as Daisy. Judy Cornwell was born on February 22, 1940, in Hammersmith, London, England. At 50 years old, she played Daisy, Hyacinth's warm, good-natured sister, in Keeping Up Appearances. Daisy brought emotional balance to the series, offering kindness and grounding that softened the show's sharper edges. Without her presence, the comedy would have tilted toward cruelty rather than contrast. That warmth was forged through displacement rather than comfort. Cornwell's childhood was unsettled, shaped by her father's service as an RAF pilot and constant family relocations, including a move to Australia. Frequent uprooting left her isolated, and she later spoke openly about being bullied at convent school. These early disruptions fostered resilience, which carried into a varied career spanning stage, television, and film, including Santa Claus, the movie, and later EastEnders. As her professional identity solidified, her personal life offered rare stability. Cornwell married John Kelsall Perry in 1960, and despite occasional strain caused by work commitments, the marriage endured. Together they raised one son, creating a private anchor that contrasted sharply with the instability of her early years. Health struggles were never central to her public story, though age naturally slowed her output. Instead of retreating inward, Cornwell redirected her creative energy into writing, publishing her autobiography, Adventures of a Jelly Baby, along with several novels. This shift allowed her voice to continue evolving, even as her appearances on screen became less frequent. Today, Judy Cornwell is 86 years old and living quietly in Brighton, largely retired from acting. Her estimated net worth is around $1 million, accumulated through decades of performance and literary work. More enduring than finances, however, is Daisy, a character remembered not for dominance, but for emotional generosity in a world built on social anxiety. David Griffin as Emmett Hawksworth. David Griffin was born on July 19, 1943, in Richmond, Surrey, England. At 48 years old, he played Emmett Hawksworth, the shy, musically gifted neighbor, in Keeping Up Appearances. Emmett's nervous avoidance of Hyacinth added a quieter layer of comedy, built on fear rather than confrontation. His discomfort gave the series emotional texture beyond verbal chaos. That sensitivity began early. Griffin's childhood was shaped by wartime anxiety, with air raids and displacement leaving lasting impressions of caution and restraint. These early fears translated into a reflective personality, which later found expression through performance rather than bravado. Over time, he built a varied career that included Hi-to-Hi and appearances in Doctor Who, balancing television with extensive stage work. As his professional life matured, Griffin built a private family life away from public attention. He married Veronique, a French woman, and together they raised 2 children. The stability of family allowed him to step back from constant visibility, even during periods when acting roles were scarce, and he took on practical work outside the industry. Rather than illness forcing an end, Griffin's later years were shaped by choice. After decades of touring, stage work, and television roles, he gradually stepped away from acting and embraced retirement, allowing his career to conclude without crisis. Today, David Griffin is 83 years old and living quietly in Sussex, fully retired from public life. His estimated net worth is around $600,000, reflecting a long, resilient career sustained by adaptability rather than fame. His legacy remains in Emmett Hawksworth, a character defined not by volume, but by vulnerability. Geoffrey Hughes as Onslow. Geoffrey Hughes was born on February 2, 1944, in Wallasey, England. At 46 years old, he played Onslow, the lazy, foul-mouthed but oddly lovable brother-in-law, in Keeping Up Appearances. His presence injected raw, working-class humor into the series, constantly puncturing Hyacinth's social pretensions. Onslow became the show's reality check, turning sloppiness into quiet rebellion. That unpolished authenticity had deep roots. Hughes grew up in an industrial working-class area, where financial pressure forced him to take responsibility early in life. Limited educational opportunities and the need to support his family shaped a grounded worldview, one that later surfaced naturally in his performances. Long before Keeping Up Appearances, he had already gained national recognition as Eddie Yates in Coronation Street, proving his instinctive connection to ordinary British life. As his career expanded, his personal life remained steady. Hughes married Susan Sue Mundell in 1975, and their marriage endured without scandal until the end of his life. They had no children, but shared a close bond built around simple pleasures: sailing, cricket, football, folk music, and social gatherings. This domestic stability stood in contrast to the chaotic characters he so often portrayed on screen. Health, however, gradually overtook momentum. Hughes was diagnosed with prostate cancer in the 1990s and continued working quietly through treatment. A relapse in 2010 brought severe pain and ultimately forced him into retirement, closing the final chapter of his professional life. Sadly, Geoffrey Hughes died on July 27, 2012, at the age of 68, from prostate cancer, passing peacefully in his sleep. By the time of his death, his estimated net worth stood at around $700,000, accumulated through decades of steady television, film, and stage work. He left behind not wealth or trophies, but a character who reminded audiences that dignity can exist even in untidiness. Mary Miller as Rose. Mary Miller was born on July 26, 1936, in Doncaster, England. At 55 years old, she played Rose, Hyacinth's flirtatious, man-hungry younger sister, in Keeping Up Appearances, joining the series from Season 2 in 1991. Her portrayal became a crucial contrast to Hyacinth's rigidity, adding a softer but still provocative edge to the show. That blend of charm and resilience was forged early. Millar's childhood unfolded in the shadow of war and poverty, touring with her parents and working from a young age in theater just to survive. By the time she reached adulthood, she had already developed the discipline that would later define her West End success, long before television audiences knew her face. As her career matured, so did her artistic reputation. Millar achieved major acclaim on stage, most notably originating the role of Madame Giry in The Phantom of the Opera in 1986, a performance preserved forever on the original cast recording. When she stepped into Keeping Up Appearances, she brought that same musical control and emotional timing, allowing Rose to feel playful rather than caricatured. Behind the scenes, her private life offered rare steadiness. Millar married photographer Raphael D. Frame in 1962, and their marriage remained strong despite the demands of her career. They had one daughter, Lucy, and family remained her emotional anchor, especially as her health began to fail in the final years of her life. Mary Millar was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in early 1998 and declined rapidly despite treatment. She died on November 10, 1998, at the age of 62 in Brockley, London, with her husband and daughter at her side. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was around $500,000, the result of a lifetime devoted to stage and screen rather than commercial fame. She left behind a performance as Rose that transformed desire into dignity. Shirley Stelfox as Rose. Shirley Stelfox was born on April 11, 1941, in Dukenfield, England. At 49 years old, she played Rose, the vampy, restless sister of Hyacinth, in the first series of Keeping Up Appearances in 1990. Her version of Rose was sharper and more openly provocative, setting the foundation for the character's comic identity. Even in a single season, she helped define the family dynamic that would drive the series forward. That toughness was shaped early. Stelfox grew up in a working-class post-war environment marked by financial hardship and emotional strain. She also lived with partial vision impairment, a challenge that forced resilience rather than retreat. Acting became both escape and assertion, leading her to train seriously and build a career across theater, film, and television. Professional recognition came steadily, rather than explosively. Beyond Keeping Up Appearances, Stelfox became widely known for long-running roles in Coronation Street and later Emmerdale, as well as her striking appearance in the film 1984. She was respected for her range, often portraying women who carried authority, bitterness, or unspoken pain. Her personal life, however, carried its own losses. Stelfox married Keith Edmondson, but the marriage ended after 3 years, leaving her with a daughter. In 1979, she married actor Don Henderson, and together they formed a blended family until his death from throat cancer in 1997. His loss marked a turning point, after which her life became quieter and more withdrawn. Only weeks after being diagnosed with terminal cancer, Shirley Stelfox died on December 7, 2015, at the age of 74 in Nottinghamshire. The speed of her decline shocked those close to her. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth stood at around $400,000, earned through decades of consistent work rather than celebrity excess. Marion Barron as the vicar's wife. Marion Barron was born on March 28, 1958 in Nigeria, and later grew up in Dumfries, Scotland. At 32 years old, she played the vicar's wife, the quietly jealous yet sharp-tongued partner, in Keeping Up Appearances. Her character added a subtle edge to parish life, transforming domestic irritation into dry humor. Together with the vicar, she deepened the show's comic portrait of polite frustration. That sensitivity was shaped by movement rather than conflict. Barron's childhood spanned cultures, moving between Nigeria and Scotland. Those early adjustments sharpened her observational instincts, which later surfaced naturally on screen. Professionally, she built a solid television resume. Before and alongside Keeping Up Appearances, Barron appeared in Don't Wait Up, Screen 2, and The Bill, often cast in roles that relied on nuance rather than volume. The vicar's wife became her most recognizable part, precisely because of that restraint. Her private life offered continuity. Barron married Simon Fuller, and together they raised 2 children, maintaining a stable family life as her on-screen appearances gradually became less frequent. In later years, she transitioned toward behind-the-scenes and selective work, favoring continuity over constant exposure. As of 2026, Marion Barron is 68 years old and continues to work primarily off-camera. Her estimated net worth stands at around $300,000, earned through a steady television career and long-term industry involvement. More lasting than figures, however, is a character remembered for proving that quiet irritation can be as revealing as open confrontation. Jeremy Gittins as the Vicar. Jeremy Gittins was born on January 30th, 1956, in England. At 34 years old, he played the vicar, Michael, the endlessly patient and quietly flustered parish priest, in Keeping Up Appearances. His calm presence became a moral counterweight to Hyacinth's chaos, turning restraint into comedy. The vicar's politeness and endurance anchored the show's social satire. That steadiness reflected an upbringing without overt turmoil, but not without pressure. Gittins has spoken about academic expectations and the early pull of performance, a tension that pushed him toward acting as a form of focus rather than escape. As he trained and found work, that discipline translated into versatility, visible in early appearances and a growing comfort with both drama and comedy. Momentum followed through consistent television work. Alongside Keeping Up Appearances, Gittins appeared in series such as Doctor Who and Blackadder Goes Forth, as well as Tenko, A Touch of Frost, and New Tricks. Each role refined a screen persona built on clarity and control, allowing him to play authority figures without stiffness. Away from the camera, his personal life provided balance. Gittins married Sarah Hollamby, and the stability of that partnership supported a career that often required long periods on set and tour. In later years, he gradually shifted emphasis toward theater and voice work, choosing craft over visibility. Now, Jeremy Gittins is 70 years old and remains active primarily on stage, focusing on performance rather than celebrity. His estimated net worth is around $500,000, reflecting decades of steady work across television, theater, and voice acting. His legacy in Keeping Up Appearances endures through a character who proved patience could be just as funny as excess. Charmian May as Mrs. Nugent. Charmian May was born on June 16, 1937, in England. At 53 years old, she played Mrs. Nugent, the conservative, rule-bound councilwoman, in Keeping Up Appearances. Her rigid authority and clipped politeness added a sharp institutional contrast to Hyacinth's chaotic social climbing. Through Mrs. Nugent, the series exposed how power could be just as absurd as pretension. That controlled exterior reflected a comparatively stable childhood. May did not grow up amid overt trauma, but she faced persistent difficulty convincing others she belonged on stage. The struggle for legitimacy shaped her resolve, pushing her toward character roles that demanded precision rather than charm. Over time, this discipline carried her into respected stage work, including touring productions of The Importance of Being Earnest, where she famously embodied Lady Bracknell. As her career progressed, May became a familiar face across British television and film. She appeared in series such as The Good Life and The Upper Hand, and later in the film Bridget Jones's Diary, where her authority translated seamlessly into modern satire. These roles reinforced her reputation as an actress who could command a scene with restraint alone. Privately, her life remained notably independent. Charmian May never married publicly and lived without a conventional family structure, devoting herself instead to work and personal autonomy. That independence mirrored the characters she often portrayed, women defined by position rather than attachment. Charmian May died on October 24, 2002, at the age of 65 after battling cancer. A Thanksgiving service for her life was later held at St. Paul's, Covent Garden. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was around $200,000, reflecting a career built on consistency and character rather than celebrity. Gretchen Franklin as Daddy's fiancée. Gretchen Franklin was born on July 7, 1911, in London, England. At 79 years old, she appeared as Daddy's fiancée, a brief but memorable late-life romantic presence, in Keeping Up Appearances. Even in limited screen time, her warmth and age-defying spirit added depth to the show's portrayal of love beyond convention. Her resilience was forged early. Franklin's childhood unfolded against the backdrop of the First World War, marked by loss and instability, despite being raised in a theatrical family. She entered show business young, working as a dancer and chorus girl before transitioning into acting. These formative years instilled stamina that would sustain a career lasting more than 7 decades. Professionally, Franklin became best known for her role as Ethel Skinner in EastEnders, where comedy gradually gave way to devastating realism. Her performances also spanned Till Death Us Do Part, Rising Damp, and numerous stage productions, revealing a rare ability to balance humor with emotional gravity. Even late in life, she remained unafraid of difficult material. Her personal life carried early loss. Franklin married John Caswell Garth in 1934, but he died of cancer in 1953, leaving her widowed at just 42. She never remarried and had no children, instead directing her affection toward charitable causes, particularly animal welfare, to which she donated much of her later earnings. Sadly, Gretchen Franklin died on July 11, 2005, at the age of 94, from causes related to old age, at her home in Barnes. Her life's work was later honored at the BAFTA Television Awards, recognizing a career defined by endurance. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth stood at around $300,000, much of which she had already given away, leaving behind a legacy measured more in generosity than wealth. Anna Dawson as Violet. Anna Dawson was born on July 27, 1937, in Bolton, Lancashire, England. At around 53 years old, she played Violet, Hyacinth's elusive, glamorous sister, in Keeping Up Appearances. Though seen only briefly, Violet became a running joke within the series, symbolizing unreachable success and exaggerated social fantasy. Her limited appearances paradoxically amplified her impact. That balance between visibility and restraint defined Dawson's life. Her childhood was largely stable, though marked by movement, including time spent in Africa due to her father's work. Early exposure to different cultures fostered adaptability, but pursuing comedy brought its own pressures. Training at ballet and drama schools demanded precision rather than ease, shaping her disciplined approach to performance. Professionally, Dawson built a solid career across stage and television. She appeared in long-running programs such as Dixon of Dock Green and The Benny Hill Show, as well as numerous West End musicals. Comedy required timing rather than dominance, and Dawson became known for supporting roles that elevated ensembles without drawing focus. Her personal life offered long-term stability. Dawson married singer John Bolter, and their partnership endured quietly for decades. Today, Anna Dawson is 89 years old and fully retired from acting. Her estimated net worth stands at around $200,000, accumulated through steady theatrical and television work rather than celebrity prominence. Jean Anderson as Mrs. Fortescue. Jean Anderson was born on December 12, 1907, in England. At around 83 years old, she appeared as Mrs. Fortescue, a dignified, sharp-tongued elderly woman, in Keeping Up Appearances. Though brief, her presence carried authority and gravitas. Her performance added generational depth to the series' portrait of British social hierarchy. That authority was earned the hard way. Anderson's childhood unfolded amid war and financial hardship, forcing resilience from an early age. These pressures shaped her seriousness and discipline long before she entered professional training. When she later studied at RADA, she brought with her a maturity that distinguished her from peers, allowing her to move quickly into demanding classical roles. Her career became vast and formidable. Anderson appeared in over 40 films and countless stage productions, working extensively with the Royal Shakespeare Company and earning acclaim for performances in works such as The Duchess of Malfi and Les Liaisons Dangereuses. On screen, audiences remembered her from The Railway Children and later television dramas, where her voice and presence alone conveyed authority. Behind the scenes, her personal life carried both attachment and loss. She married director Peter Powell in 1934, a creative partnership that later dissolved in divorce in 1949. They had one daughter, Aude Powell, who would go on to become a prominent talent agent. In later years, Anderson lived quietly, gradually retreating from public life without spectacle. Sadly, Jean Anderson died on April 1, 2001, at the age of 93, from causes related to old age. By the end of her life, her estimated net worth was around $250,000, reflecting a career built on endurance, theater, and character, rather than commercial stardom. Time has changed their faces, their voices, and even their lives, but the laughter they gave us still feels strangely familiar. Looking back now, which member of the Keeping Up Appearances cast surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoy revisiting classic television stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more Hollywood nostalgia.